The taint of chaos is an ever-present threat within the Imperium of Man, turning those once faithful to the God Emperor into twisted and abhorrent mockeries of what were once the pure and noble defenders of humanity. With their intimidating and garish colour schemes, the heretical forces of Slaanesh are unmistakable amongst the traitor legions. These hedonistic followers of the Lord of Excess travel throughout the Immaterium, seeking out twisted pleasures wherever the virtuous tread, and defile anyone and anything on their path to perfection in all things. This is Dave from Warpsong Games. Although we made a decent start on the forces of Khorne a few months back, the Berserkers have been getting rather restless as of late. They require enemies. They need enemies. And so I have provided them with a foe so twisted and foul that they make the Berserkers themselves seem almost normal by comparison. Even though we don't currently have an Emperor's Children Codex, you can still make a fairly competitive multi-wound Slaaneshi force from the current edition Chaos Codex in the meantime. That being the case, since the last video, I've been busy army building. Wanting something slightly different, I've created a splinter group of the Flawless Host, a demonkin army full of tentacles and crab claws I've dubbed the Tainted Host. These tentacle hosts of Slaaneshi demons managed to get themselves kicked out of the Flawless Host for doing very wrong things to their fellow members of their warband, although they're not limited to any specific warband, as they can easily fit in with a classic Emperor's Children army or even with the Black Legion. While we're on the topic of army building, this is a custom mutilator I converted to complement the Possessed squad. When I figured out that the old metal obliterators were relatively cheap on eBay, I might have gotten carried away a bit. When I'm done converting this lot, I will have a vast horde of mutilators capable of deep striking into the heart of enemy positions to cause all manner of perverse mayhem. The good thing about these second-hand obliterators is that even if they've been painted in another scheme, a quick bath in some Dettol and a little scrubbing will have them looking new again. With all these custom followers of Slaanesh, you may be wondering, what about the Noise Marine conversion? Don't worry, this video is in the works. I've just gotten a little sidetracked by several other projects. Now, back to today's conversion. Most of the parts you'll need to assemble your Possessed are taken directly from the Chaos Space Marine sprue, such as the body, head and the backpack. All you need to add is an arm from the Raptor kit and a little green stuff for the tentacles. As for the hands, these widely available lightning claws are from the Warp Talon kit. If we take a closer look, they're not quite the usual lightning claws, looking more like mutated fists with a large hand and protruding talons. When compared to a standard lightning claw, you can tell the difference, with the original looking more like a fully articulated metal hand. So in conclusion, these are not lightning claws, but lies. But luckily, this makes them readily available on bit sites. As an alternative to the Warp Talon parts, I've also gathered a pile of arms from the Chaos Possessed kit. These come in a good variety of shapes and sizes to customize your Possessed. They're also fairly cheap if you can find them on bit sites. The last ingredient I'll be using is obviously green stuff. But don't worry, this is both a simple and satisfying green stuff task that can be accomplished with minimal skills and no specialist equipment. So, let's move on to this conversion and I'll show you how it's done. Firstly, I start with a standard Chaos Space Marine body. These make for good templates to base conversions on, as they're nicely detailed, but still have enough room for customization. They're also fairly neutral with no specific Legion marks, if you ignore all of the Black Legion style eyes covering every model. This conversion also works well with the Monopose Start Collecting Chaos Space Marines kit. This is useful if you want to save a few pounds, as the sprues are available on eBay for less than the price of a standard squad. The Aspiring Champion is a snap-fit Primaris model. I bought these guys to fight for their Emperor against heresy, but they were corrupted by chaos before I could even get the primer on them. To start this conversion off, I need to drill into their armholes so that tentacles can later be inserted. That almost sounded wrong. I use a fairly large drill bit for this, as it will still need expanding to show where the tentacles have erupted out of the side of the armour. I do this with all the models, occasionally alternating the side that the tentacle arm will be on to give the squad a bit more of an organic appearance. I use my scalpel to expand the hole so that it is approximately the size of the flat, featureless area, usually covered up by the arm. The same method applies to all the different models I have here. I place the scalpel in the drill hole and gradually whittle away the plastic. I make sure not to gouge out any large dents, as I want it to be nice and smooth all the way around. Make sure that you have a good sharp scalpel blade for this, as it'll save you a bit of time. At this point in the conversion, it may look like you've just ruined a perfectly good squad of Chaos Space Marines, and I suppose at this point, technically, you have. That being said, this type of conversion is perfect for models in your bits box that aren't in 100% condition, such as ones you've picked up for cheap on eBay. Next, I drill an arm hole into the other side of the model. This time I skip out the scalpel work, as I'll just be attaching a regular arm on this side, not a bunch of tentacles. With both sides drilled, it's now time to put in the framework for the tentacles. For this, I'm using a humble paperclip, widely available from your local stationery store or nearest unguarded stationery cupboard. After unfolding the paperclip into a straight length of wire, I bend the tip so that it fits through the body of the Primaris Marine. This model is a little trickier than the rest to thread the wire through, as I have to maneuver around the SnapFit design's internal pegs. With a little persistence, I work my way around the pegs and successfully thread the paperclip through the torso, ready for the tentacles. Now I just repeat this step with the other models. As you can see, the paperclip fits through much easier when you don't have to bend it around any pegs. Next, I apply a little glue to the short side of the wire and push it back through the model, securing it in place for the next step. With the wire in place, I roll up a small sausage of green stuff for each of the models in the squad. Then using a cocktail stick, I insert the green stuff into the armhole. I use the stick to push the green stuff securely into the torso and around the wire. This step makes sure that the scaffold is firmly anchored to the model. I just repeat this same process for all of the models. Remember that this doesn't have to look perfect, as you won't be able to see it when the arm is finally in place. The important thing here is that the wire is secure in the model, so I just keep packing green stuff into the torso, forming a solid plug that is unlikely to come loose. This method also works with these monopose models. I just take a little extra time to place the green stuff into the torso, being careful to avoid the attached shoulder pad. Although a little awkward, these models are really no more difficult to convert than the regular Marines and give the squad a little bit more variety. With this step complete, I make sure to wait for the green stuff to dry before moving on to the next step. Although the scaffold for the arm is securely in place, it isn't ready to cover in tentacles quite yet. Currently the wire is in a rather unusual stiff pose. I need to change it up to a more dynamic and organic shape to make it look more alive. I find the best thing to use for this is a pair of needle nose pliers. As the wire is fairly soft, I can easily bend it into position until I'm happy that it will make an interesting foundation for the tentacle arm. I bend the wire at multiple points to give it a more animated appearance. There are no particular rules to this task, I just keep manipulating the wire until it looks right. To get a more accurate and tighter bend, I use a second set of pliers to hold the wire in place. Although, caution must be taken when working with a scaffold, as you don't want to overstrain it and have it snap in two. I make a note to leave enough clearance for the shoulder pad to sit comfortably over the tentacles when they're done. I don't want it to be awkwardly balanced on top of the arm, as that would look a little unnatural. I make sure to add some variation to the squad by bending each Marine's wire in a slightly different way. The key to this conversion is capturing the spontaneousness of the warp's mutations. It should be in a stark contrast with the usual rigid and regimented feel of the Astartes. The key to this conversion is capturing the spontaneousness of the warp's mutations. It should be in stark contrast with the usual rigid and regimented feel of the Astartes. One thing I enjoy about having a Chaos Force is that you can be a bit more flexible and creative with some of the units like this. The only downside is that you get a little carried away creating whole custom squads for your army and end up taking a little longer than you planned in building a battle-ready force. Now that I'm happy with the initial structure of the scaffolding, I use my metal snips to cut off any excess wire. As you can see, each of them are starting to look like they have their own personality, even before adding the green stuff or the heads. I would say that this is a good sign. Putting the models aside for now, it's time to break out the modelling kit and make some tentacles. This is actually quite a fun task, as far as green stuff work goes, and all you really need is a cocktail stick and some green stuff. So now let me show you how it's done. As you can see, I have rolled up various sized balls of green stuff ready to make into tentacles. This is not a particularly precise task, as I want a variation in the thickness of the tentacles. As I'm converting a whole squad of possessed, I'm going to make the tentacles en masse. So this part of the process is all about getting a large amount of green stuff ready to roll. With the balls prepared, I use a toothbrush to coat them in water so they don't start sticking to everything. I can't make a video about tentacle making without showing you this handy tool. The roll maker is useful for making textured tentacles and wires of various patterns, and if you've got one, then you can easily add a bit more detail to the tentacles. For the purpose of this video, I'm just using the back of it to roll the green stuff on, as it is a perfectly sized smooth, flat surface, ideal for rolling out tentacles. You could substitute this easily with a couple of squares of plasticard, or even an old CD or DVD case. Now it's time to roll out the tentacles. I place the back of the roll maker onto the green stuff and roll it into shape. With different sized green stuff pieces and varying amounts of pressure on the roller, you will get a good diversity of tentacle thicknesses and lengths, giving your models a more chaotic and organic feel. I repeat this step and keep rolling more tentacles, as I want a good stockpile to work with. Here you can see my setup for making tentacles. Though this setup may be simple, it acts as a good production line to produce plenty of tentacles quickly. The only downside is that it's easy to get carried away and make more than you're able to use. Now that I have a stack of tentacles, I can use the roll maker for its intended purpose. This step is not mandatory, so don't worry if you don't have one. But if you do a lot of work with green stuff, then they are indeed a useful little tool to have. I place a tentacle in between two of the textured plates. The direction of the lines gives different patterns on the end piece. I roll the two plates together and in no time I've created a textured tentacle. This can give an interesting and easy variation to your possessed parts, as well as being useful for creating different types of wires, as you may have seen in our tiny Noctilith crown video. Back to the conversion, it's time to insert the tentacles into the hole. For this, I'll be using a load of cocktail sticks and a large amount of Gorilla Glue. I apply a good amount of glue onto a cocktail stick and spread it onto the empty armpit and around the top of the wire. Using a clean cocktail stick, I insert the first tentacle into the hole and carefully press it into the glued area. It's important to make sure that the tentacle is inserted into the hole fully, as you don't want them falling out when you're trying to glue them into place. Once it is securely anchored in, I can then start to attach it to the scaffold, wrapping it around and applying another good coat of glue with the cocktail stick. I am using the sticks for this job as they're useful for maneuvering the tentacles into place without getting them covered in fingerprints. Also, as they're disposable, it doesn't matter if they get coated in glue. With this done, I repeat the step with the next tentacle. I apply glue to the wire, insert the tentacle, and then wrap it around the scaffold. It's important to make sure that there is plenty of glue on the wire to securely attach the tentacle in place. Once this is done, I can carefully wrap the tentacle around the wire, making the arm look a little bit more complete. Again, I make sure that all the green stuff is pushed firmly into the chest cavity. You don't want your hard work randomly falling out mid-battle. I keep adding more tentacles in the same way until the scaffold is no longer visible. It's important to be careful where you place your fingers when working with green stuff. You don't want to flatten out all the details you've just added in. With the wire now covered, I focus my attention to the tips. With the finer tentacles, it's important to bunch the ends together, as the green stuff is not the toughest material when it's rolled this thin, and you don't want the ends to start snapping off your tentacles. I decided to wrap and then curl them around so that they are supported from behind, as you can see. Another option is to use slightly chunkier tentacles, like I have on this Primaris Marine. Seeing as they are thicker than the previous examples, I actually need to use less of them to complete the arm. Although you should make sure that they're not too chunky as to prevent the shoulder pad from fitting comfortably over the top. Once you've mastered the basics, you can move on to more complicated designs, such as this Marine here. By installing 2 wire scaffolds in the armhole instead of just one, this possessed Marine stands out from the squad. I also added different textures to some of the tentacles, using the roll maker. Although it may look effective, here is a good example of what not to do with green stuff. This lone tentacle sticking out from the rest will snap off far too easily if knocked or dropped. So if you plan on using your models in games, try to keep the tentacles bunched together for added strength. Although adding tentacles to an entire squad can seem like a time-consuming process, luckily it's also a surprisingly enjoyable task. The key to working with green stuff this thin is to keep the cocktail sticks wet when manoeuvring the tentacles in place. This makes everything easier to work with by stopping the tentacles sticking together and keeping them smooth by avoiding any potential dents. As I was making so many tentacles at one time, some of the thinner tentacles were virtually set by the time I installed them. Surprisingly enough, this did not seem to make much of a difference, as they were still malleable enough to bend into place. With the tentacles complete, I attempt to tidy up the workspace. As you can see, I have a stack of tentacles left over, as well as a small forest worth of cocktail sticks. With all the complicated stuff over with, I simply assemble the rest of the Chaos Space Marines as usual, with the exception of the non-tentacled arms, which I'll be dealing with now. I chose a Crabclaw for the Primaris model, as he's taken the role of aspiring champion and the combination of tentacles and Crabclaws just has a very Slaaneshi feel to it. This arm is from the Possessed Chaos Space Marines box set. These parts can look a little clunky on the intended models, but make great conversion parts. To attach the arm, I drill out a hole approximately the same size as the paperclip I attached earlier. I apply a generous amount of adhesive and simply slot the arm onto the pin, making sure that it's in the desired pose. Next, I attach the shoulder pad. This one is from the Chaos Space Marine kit, but any Chaos shoulder pad will do. To fit the shoulder pad, I whittle away the collar with my scalpel until there is enough clearance to attach it. With this done, I apply glue to the inside of the shoulder pad and attach it over the tentacles, making sure that it is in line with the other shoulder. Next, I add some glue to a cocktail stick and place it into the neck hole. To get a dynamic pose, it's a good idea to look at the direction of the tentacle and work from there. As for the backpack, you can't really go too wrong here, so let's move on to the arms. I attach the lightning claws to the rest of the models, the same way as I attach the possessed arm to the aspiring champion. First, I assemble the claw, then I apply a little glue to the pin and attach the arm. And finally, I maneuver it into a suitable pose. With both arms now on, I need to choose an appropriate head. I position it in a suitably menacing fashion and quickly glue on a backpack. With those simple steps completed on the 6-man squad, I now have a formidable custom squad of possessed Chaos Space Marines dedicated to Slaanesh. Now all I need to do is paint them to a tabletop standard and they'll be ready for battle. And here we have a completed squad of converted possessed Chaos Space Marines in the Flawless Host colour scheme. I chose the Flawless Host scheme as it's quick, simple, effective, and most importantly, trimless. Being so bright, this scheme is undoubtedly memorable as far as Chaos Forces go. As well as that, when fighting a skirmish on the tabletop, you've the added bonus of no one wanting to lose against the guy with the bright pink army. I don't want to know what the servants of Slaanesh do to the vanquished with all those tentacles. You may be wondering where the flame patterns you often see on the Flawless Host are. I found it's best to paint your squads to a basic tabletop standard initially. If you're always aiming to paint to a Golden Demon standard, then you'll never have enough models complete to do any worthwhile battles. That being said, I do plan to add both flames and warband markings to my squads in the future, although currently this requires me to first create, then print custom transfers for the Tainted Host. And I just can't be bothered with all that yet. After a good battle, I like to upgrade any squad or character that has done something noteworthy with battle honours. I think the flame markings will fit this role quite well. That way you'll eventually end up with a unique looking army with a story behind every squad. Also, I've seen lots of nicely painted single models for the Flawless Host scheme, but rarely have I seen any whole squads, and I've never seen an entirely finished whole army. I want the Tainted Host to be an exception to this rule, as I plan on making a large Chaos Force dedicated to the Lord of Excess. Speaking of which, here's a sneak peek at more of the Tainted Host. Not being a big fan of the current edition Games Workshop mutilators, I decided to convert some of my own. With custom crab claws and an undeniably handsome face, these mutilators look far more suited to the worship of Slaanesh than their store-bought variety. Considering it's a surprisingly simple but fun conversion, you may see a video on these guys in the future. As well as the standard Chaos Space Marines, I found that models from the Dark Vengeance box set also make interesting possessed units. The models are highly detailed and are available for relatively cheap on eBay. The only catch is that they're a few mils shorter than the current edition Heretic Astartes. which luckily is less noticeable when you cover them in tentacles. In a sort of related matter, does anybody else here waste time by dating and adding squad colours to the underside of all their bases? I've been doing this for years, as I find it's a good way of tracking the progress of your painting skill. It's also a handy way of keeping track of which squads have earned battle honours after a game. Let me know what you think in the comments. We are Warp Song Games. If you enjoyed this tentacle themed video, then like, subscribe and share. Don't forget to leave a comment if you want to see more Tainted Host, or if you have any suggestions on what you'd like to see in the future. If you're interested in checking out any of our previous videos, then click on one of the links above.